Alright, a very warm welcome back everyone. Today we want to talk about the templates mixing part or mixing console. So I'm just going to hit F3. This brings up my mixer, and the first thing I want to do is enable all of those racks, right? Because I want to have everything visible and accessible. So I need to have all of these racks available in order to do so. You can maybe even leave some of those out, for example, the equalizer or the strip, because you can access them by the channel strip here. But I like to have all of those, so I'm not just searching for any things that might miss or might have been missing. Also, we want to have the rack set up here to a non-exclusive expanded rack, which means if I have the exclusive rack, it basically means that I have one of those racks open at one time. But if I do disable this, so I do not have any exclusive access anymore, I can have multiple of those open. And this is what I like to use. Then we see that we have basically 4 tracks now here, and I want to align them in a way that my outputs are always on the right, my inputs are always on the left, and everything else, so all other tracks I'm using are basically in the middle. And one way to do this is go to visibility and then to zones. I'm not sure if this works with any Cubase version, but it does work with Cubase Pro. But I'm not sure if this works for Elements or Artist or something. Then we enable all of our tracks here, and we just have these 3 little dots, so we can just click on those and make our and align all of those channels here. So in this case, we have our input, we have our composing tool, and then we have the outputs here. Also, I do not tend to use the stereo in that much, so I would probably want to disable this. It does not work if I'm just going here to channel visibility agent and then hide selected channels, because this is a global track. But what does work is if I'm going back to visibility and then channels, we have these little check marks right next to the channels, and if I'm just clicking on one of those, this hides the complete channel for all of our configurations. Speaking of configurations, what a nice transition. Speaking of configurations, we want to save this configuration as our standard configuration now. So we go to configurations here, add configuration, and then give it a name. Maybe this should be default. And then we can, and the real benefit only comes if we have more of those configurations. So let's just add some more of those. For example, one without a stereo in bus. Actually, we could save this as the default one, but maybe one without the group channels. So let's go here to set channel type filter. We have all channels enabled now, but I only want to have the input channels, the output channels, and then my instrument and audio channels. We'll get to groups in just a second. And then we'll go to add configuration once again, and I'll call this VST plus audio. So, and next one I want to add, let's just quickly add some more. We also want to group channels to have here, because of course the master channel is missing. We can, in fact, go to all channel types and leave the master channel active at all times, but in this case, since we are filtering based on the channel type, this would not work if the group channels in general are disabled. And then I want to add this configuration as VST plus audio plus group, for example. And then we would have basically, let's say, group channels plus VCA faders. We'll get to VCA faders later on. So let me just disable the audio and instrument and add another configuration for group and VCA. And the last one I want to have is basically a mixing configuration just for the effects channels. Effects channels, because in some of the larger templates or larger projects in general, you might use more than one effect, and therefore you might want to have all of those accessible all at once to, for example, check the routing, right? So if we have all of these saved now, we can freely change between those. And you could also go ahead, for example, and say, okay, I have VST plus audio and VST plus audio plus group, and I want my stereo in bus to be available in all of those. So I would go update configuration. Then for this one I would update the configuration also, and then we would have, if we go to default, it would be disabled, and for the other ones it would be enabled. So very neat. Now one thing I want to mention though is that you could also load effects or inserts into your template before you're going to use this template, right? Or before you're saving this template for later use. And I want to use a limiter on this master channel here, mainly because I don't want to have my monitors going broken because my sound is too loud, for example. And also if I'm using headphones, I don't want the sound to be that loud for my ears. And also maybe to have nothing clipping. So I'm just going to search for a limiter. You see that we have multiple of those available, and we'll talk about those in another video. And I'm going to use the limiter here. Standard limiter looks like this. Again, we are talking about this later on. And then using a brick wall limiter afterwards. The reason for that is also present in a different video, but I want to make this brick wall limiter a post fader effect. So I would just like to move this to the post fader slot and then adjust these lines. So the green line is basically where pre-fader and post fader effects change. And the post fader is basically an effect that is applied after all of this stuff has gone through the master channel. And this is a thing that we can do because we have the stereo out bus afterwards. So this is another way to check if we're doing everything correctly, right? You could also, of course, do this on the stereo out bus, but then you do not have any, let's say, any option to see if this is actually working or not. So you could potentially be crashing everything if you have a post fader insert or a post fader maximizer or something like that on your stereo out, because then the signal would be much louder than you anticipated. If you use other plugins, you can also combine those two limiters, but the reason for this setup is again explained in a different video then. So now enough talking. I want to export this or save this as a template for my use, set everything correctly, and then I'm going to File and Save as Template. And I have now the option to choose a name first. So let's just say this is a template stop. And content summary, this is a basic template for starting your production, for example. Template category I would choose to be production. And if I'm hitting OK now, this template should come up in my hub where I have my production here, and I can choose the templates I've created above this thick white line, right? And they are accessible there for every new project you're going to create. All right, I think this concludes it, and we'll come together in the next one.